health. So Maryam will use poetry and personal storytelling to explore how our bodies carry pain, generational, medical, and emotional, and how creative expression can be a powerful path to healing and trust. So I'm just going to introduce her really quick, and then I'll pass it over to her. Maryam Bukar Hassan is an award-winning performance poet, strategic communicator, and global advocate for social change. Hailing from Borno State, Nigeria, she uses the power of storytelling to champion justice, gender equality, and youth empowerment. Her work has been featured on global stages, including the United Nations, TEDx, African Union, COP28, and the Global Citizen Platform. A passionate maternal health advocate, she has led high-level campaigns and spoken at key global health forums, including the World Health Assembly in Geneva. In 2025, she was named one of the 100 most reputable Africans for her impactful work across the continent. As a founder of True My Voice, she has empowered over 500,000 young storytellers across Africa and was a 2024 finalist at the UN SDG Action Awards. She has also driven change through collaborations with Change.org, the Nigerian Governors Forum, and the Canadian High Commission. Her influence spans over 10 million people globally, merging creativity with advocacy to inspire lasting change. So welcome, Maryam.
Oh, thank you so much, Alexis. Hello, everyone. I'm so happy to be here with all of you. Thank you so much for having me. Alexis, can I just jump in? Is that okay?
Yeah, you're good.
Okay. Hello, everyone. So just as Alexis said, my name is Alhanislam. I'm a poet and a strategist, and I'm someone who deeply believes that the most powerful data set on earth is the lived human story. So in this session, I would want us to explore how poetry is not just a performance art, but actually a strategic, healing, and globally relevant tool for advancing public health conversations. So I just want you to do something with me. I want us to start by pausing and take one breath, one deep breath, and silently ask yourself, what does my body know that my job title hasn't been allowed to say out loud? I just want us to take a moment to think about that. And if you'd like to share, you can just drop it in the chat box. So before we move from here, I would like to request Alexis to please play the video that Maryam shared, which is a campaign, Neglected Tropical Disease, that we did using poetry.
We have it, Maryam. We're going to play it for you.
Thank you.
I stand at the crossroads of indifference and urgency. where the forgotten weep in silence and the world turns away. There are wars we fight with fire and fury, and then there are the battles we abandon. Battles against shadows that creep under our skin, against afflictions that bear no headline and no primetime sorrow. Come closer. Let me tell you a story. There was a boy named Hassan. His feet swelled like the moontide, elephantiasis wrapping around his limbs like chains. And in the market they whispered, called him cursed. But the real curse was not the disease, it was the neglect. For he did not choose to walk with agony, to be shackled by lymph and burdened by stigma. He only wanted to run, to chase the wind. But who speaks for the boy with swollen dreams? There was a woman named Maria, whose river carried an invisible wall. She scooped water in faith, only to swallow snail fever, a parasite whispering in her blood, making a home of her liver, making a battlefield of her womb. She did not know that a simple pill, a single intervention, could have saved her from this quiet war. But who delivers salvation to those who do not scream? Who writes poetry for the ones who itch at midnight, scratching at the cruelty of onchocerciasis, the river blindness that steals sight like a thief in the dark? Who composes symphonies for the neglected, those whose flesh is kissed by leprosy's slow erosion, whose bodies bear the forgotten fingerprints of fate? See, the world loves a tragedy with a villain, a pandemic that panics Wall Street, a crisis that spills into boardrooms. But what of the diseases that lurk in villages, in the slums of the unseen, in the children too poor to be noticed, too distant to be rescued? Shall we wait until their suffering grows loud enough to shake the foundations of power? Or shall we right now, this moment, declare that neglect is no longer a choice? Leaders, ministers, guardians of policy, hear this clarion call. To eradicate is to elevate. To heal is to empower. Invest in the unseen and fund the forgotten, because no disease is truly neglected, only the people who suffer from it. And we will not be silent. We will not turn away. For if we claim to be the custodians of progress, then let us prove it, not just in words but in action. Let the world no longer be measured by the strength of its wealth, but by the weight of its compassion. Let the neglected rise, and may no child's future be stolen by a disease that we have the power to defeat. It is indeed time to escape the neglect.
Thank you so much, Alexis, for sharing, and thank you so much to everyone who paid attention and watched. So this video was a video that we produced together with DevEx and Gates Foundation. And what we sort of explored there was a cross-pollination of poetry and multimedia for greater reach or higher reach. But also, I just want to share a little bit of my story with you on why I started this and why I felt like multimedia cross-pollination with art can actually drive that message. So when I was 13, my aunt got abused by her husband. And as an angry young child, I didn't exactly know what to do. I felt powerless. And so I picked a pen and a paper and I wrote a letter and I gave it to my mom. And I said to my mom, take it to her husband. Why did he hit my aunt? And my mom read the letter and she came back to me and she said, this has elements of poetry and we should absolutely record this. And at that time, I didn't feel bold enough. And so I told her I was shy. And so she said, okay, she let me be. And when I turned 16, she came back again. And she said, please, can you just trust me and come with me? Let's go to the studio and get this recorded. And I said to her, but it's just words. What impact would it have? And she said, let's try. So we went to the studio, got it recorded. She insisted that it would be a video, and we did that. And after we did that, In like 2 weeks, it got 3 million views. And we had someone from my hometown, Borno State, the local government view, where he reached out and he said because of the video, he stopped hitting his mom, stopped hitting his wife. And my mom called me for me to witness that. And so I said to myself, anything that has the power to change a mindset is something I definitely want to do. And so from then, she would actually call me and we would explore topics. She would tell me, oh, this is what's happening. What do I think about that? And then I would sit and we would in poetry as a tool for global health and bringing those issues to the fore. I think for me, when I made that decision was actually when my aunt, one of them, her name is Safia, she bled for 8 hours after to her child, and the system called it normal. And I asked myself, but like, what is so normal about neglect? So that day I actually learned the power of naming, and poetry helped me to do that, not just to mourn, but actually organize. And so I started to think that if clinics won't translate our ache, then we should tattoo it in verses. And because sometimes, especially in the global south, we inherit heirlooms. Um, grief is renamed cultural silence, and the body is an archive, a whistleblower, and a map. And so we must learn to honor it. And so I started to explore using poetry as a tool for global health advocacy, which led to that campaign, that video. But also, despite saying all of this to you, I know some of us might have the question then, why poetry? And for me, I say because poetry is the language of witness. It is the voice that says, this hurts, when policy actually says this is normal. Because also poetry translates pain into policy. And people, they don't necessarily remember the chart, but they remember my cousin coughed blood in a waiting room and no one came because it's humanized. Again, is power. The colonizer couldn't kill it. Even when books were banned, you had garriots that still sang. And even when it was denied, truth actually lived in metaphor. Poetry is soft power. Poetry is community data. Poetry equals cultural healing, and poetry equals political memory. And I think sometimes poetry is often dismissed as soft, abstract. But why I feel it's actually one of the sharpest, most ancient advocacy tools we've ever had is because poetry in itself is portable policy. It sort of distills complex systems into heartfelt truths. Climate change becomes our children cough in languages we don't yet have asthma medicines for. So you name the pain in a way that is humanized. It makes data memorable, emotional, and mobilizing. The second is poetry breaks the silence. So, in cultures where pain is private or censored, poetry actually finds a way to smuggle the truth through beauty, and it lets people say what they can't say while still being heard. So, think of like the apartheid in South Africa. Poetry was used as protest, or Somali oral traditions. Poems are used as policy documents. So this is actually not new. It's an ancient strategy, and I believe that we can collectively leverage it. Also, the third one, poetry is a language of the body, and sometimes the public feels alienated by health reports, strategy document, PowerPoint decks, but they understand something like my mother's diabetes tastes like scarcity. Poetry speaks the language of survival. So now I would like to give a little bit of like a case study. Again, one of which you've already seen in the video was a poetry led campaign where we used personal narrative and performance to call attention to overlooked medical conditions um, and generational health trauma. So this for me was a policy intervention in verse. And what we did with that campaign was spark conversations with ministries, NGOs, and also youths. And even there was an exclusive viewing with the stakeholders who were basically the largest funders of the neglected tropical disease in Geneva. And we brought them to a room with DevEx and they watched this, and pledges were made to increase the funding for the global south in terms of eradicating neglected tropical disease. So that is the kind of progress that I guess poetry can, when leveraged right, can bring to a community, a society, or even a continent. Um, Another case study is the poetry acts by youth mental health advocates, which were young poets in Kenya and South Africa. They wrote poems about suicide ideation and they later adapted them into toolkits for school counselors. And in that case, you could say that poetry actually became infrastructure. So, also during the Black Lives Matter and the COVID poetry in the US, you had community members that wrote grief haikus and displayed them at vaccination centers, reframing pain as a public testimony. And this also led to more inclusive health messaging in Baltimore. But let's bring it back home a little bit to us here in this space. How can we actually use poetry strategically? And I know that some of you here would say, but I'm not a poet. Yes, you may not be a poet, but you're a story holder, you're a witness, and you're an amplifier. So, and I know you might think, how do I start? So I want to give some pointers on how I think that you can start, and we can all leverage words for this. And I also want to ask, do you want to maybe write a poem together at the end of this? If yes, please drop it in the chat box. So here's how to start. The first is data to poem exercise. You can take one data point from your organization or from your community and ask, what story is behind the statistics? Then you can write a one-line poetic truth. So I give you an example. 1 in 3 women lack access to maternal care. This is the data. Now, the poem line: she gave birth in a taxi with silence as a midwife. So this is like a way that you can try out your hands in terms of like writing lines of poetry with the data to poem exercise. So I'm just going to share this in the chat group. Also, I'm going to read it out. It's a prompt that I think you can actually use to just practice. So I'm going to paste this right here. So it's write a 4-line poem about a moment your body tried to tell you something, but the world ignored it. So, for instance, my throat closed in meetings, but they called it shyness. It was my grief unspoken. I swallowed protest. So, it's all about naming your pain. Um, and I hope this would help in trying out the exercise. I would also copy the other one and post that can help you in terms of trying out the poetry exercise. Okay, there. Um, so the second one also in terms of how you can start. You can host sessions where affected people craft and share their truth. And that truth, I write poetry without rules because I feel like it is the best way to allow someone express themselves, but you can guide them in terms of saying how can you name your truth in a way that is humanized. So you can host sessions where affected people craft and share poems about their health experiences. You can record, you can get consent, and then you can curated and then use these stories in reports, in campaigns, grants, and so that there is dignity kind of attached to it, and we're not just reduced to statistics. The third is integrating the poetry in global advocacy spaces. So it could be policy forums, donor calls, you can open or close with a short poem, and you don't have to be a poet to do that. Like I said, you can start with as little as just a stanza, like 4 lines, and naming your truth. Because what that does is that it sets more than the tone, it actually anchors the sense of urgency. And because if people feel before they think, then they're more likely to act before they forget. And a lot of things that we face these days, we need that kind of action. Another is you can actually use poetry as an entry point in research or advocacy. You can use poetic excerpts in research intros, quote lived experiences, not just with citation, but you can add rhythm to it. um, Poetic reports or audio zines. You can turn community consultations into audio poems, also with consent, of course, and let people tell the story in their voice. I mean, there are people that might not be comfortable being in front of a camera, but you can improvise and record the audio and then, create some nice graphics, because poetry in itself is great, but when you bring in that media component, it makes it more accessible, and it makes it more impactful. And I've seen that in the work that I do. Um, then partnerships as well. You can pair with like filmmakers, midwives, herbalists, climate activists, and then sort of always be intentional in using that language to sort of unite um, sectors, because what moves people is actually what moves them. So you don't just give them information, you give them something that moves them. So I'm also going to now share with you another writing prompt for like a community advocacy poem. I'm also going to read it out. So it's write a 3 to 5 line poem that names one public health injustice and calls for one act of courage. So you can start with I want a world where, or no more of. So I'll just copy this and paste it in there. Okay, there we go. Um, One thing that also I would like to say is that poetry won't fix broken systems actually. But what it does is that it reminds us that systems were made and that they can be remade. So when you're so intentional with how you talk about these issues, with paying attention to how it is humanized and bring in that, because like, and everybody has a name, right? And we're not just numbers. The situations that we're not going through, that we're going through, should not just be reduced to the numbers. So poetry in itself is a language. So yeah, poetry wouldn't fix broken systems, but it reminds us that systems were made and that they can be remade. And so I don't want to take much of your time. And so I like to close with this. May your policies pulse like heartbeats. May data dance with drum beats. And may everybody be heard, not just healed. Thank you so much. I'm Alhanislam, and I believe that your voice is an instrument of global health. Today, you've chosen to breathe with me, and I don't take that lightly. So, before we close, I want us to breathe. I want us to inhale. I want us to inhale. We inhale the stories of our grandmothers hid between their ribs, and I want us to exhale the silence wrapped around pain that no one dared name. Again, I want us to inhale trust, and I want us to exhale tension. Now, if you can, I want us to place one hand on our chest and another on our stomach, and just feel. And I want us to whisper to ourselves, my body remembers. My story matters. My body remembers. My story matters. My body remembers. My story matters. Thank you for entering this space with courage, and may you leave here with rhythm in your work and fire in your hands. Thank you so much.